I could not have written Ready Player One if I had not grown up on a steady diet of Steven Spielberg movies. It would have been a different story, or I might not have written it at all. His work is woven into the fabric of my life. Everybody, I think, who dreams of making movies dreams of getting to work with him. It's a dream come true.
Everybody turned up got shot. Some they buried alive.
Right? Colonel? Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
A peace symbol, sir.
Where'd you get it?
I don't remember, sir.
What is that you've got written on your helmet?
Born to kill, sir.
You write born to kill on your helmet and you wear a peace button. What's that supposed to be? Some kind of sick joke?
No, sir.
What is it supposed to mean?
I don't know, sir.
You don't know very much, do you?
No, sir.
You better get your head and your wired together or I will take a giant on you.
Yes, sir.
Now answer my question or you'll be standing tall before the man.
I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir.
The what?
The duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
Whose side are you on, son?
Our side, sir.
Don't you love your country?
Yes, sir.
Then how about getting with the program? Why don't you jump on the team and come on in for the big win?
Yes, sir.
Son, all I've ever asked of my Marines is for them to obey my orders as they would the word of God. We are here to help the Vietnamese because inside every gook there is an American trying to get out. It's a hardball world, son. We've got to try to keep our heads until this peace craze blows over.
Aye, aye, sir.
Tell me something. Why is it so hard for you to kill this man?
He knew every move of mine before I made it.
Forever young.
I'd have him right there. I'd take the shot.
I wanna be forever young.
And he'd be gone, like a ghost.
Do you really wanna live forever?
Who is he?
I don't want to be an icon. I want to be an idea. You know, I want to represent an idea. I want to represent possibilities. I want to represent magic, right? That you're in a universe and 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 only equals 4 if you accept that 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 is going to be what I want it to be. You know, and there's a redemptive power that making a choice has, you know, rather than feeling like you're at effect to all the things that are happening. Make a choice. Like, you just decide what it's going to be, who you're going to be, how you're going to do it. Just decide. And then from that point, the universe is going to get out your way. It's like it's water. It wants to move and go around stuff, you know. So for me, I want to represent possibilities. I want to represent the idea that you really can make what you want. One of my favorite books is The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho, and I just believe that. I believe that I can create whatever I want to create. If I can put my head on it right, study it, learn the patterns, and you know, it's hard to put into words some real metaphysical, esoteric nonsense.
Forever young.
I think I know why he's as good as you. He is you.
25 years ago, they made you from me. They chose me because there's never been anybody like me. We have to end this right now. You have all of his gifts without his pain. You made a person out of another person. Then you sent me to kill him. You made a choice to do this to me. biggest thing that you're struggling with is fear. Embrace it and then overcome it. Of all the people in the world to come after me, why would he send you?
It's the Vilest Most Excellent here, and thank you for checking out my video. I'm going to be talking about dualism and how it's really the religion of the elite, the Illuminists, the so-called Illuminati, and the various organizations that might fall under that umbrella term, like the Freemasons, Knights Templar, Skull and Bones, Gnostics, which, the Freemasons are just Gnostics, they just go by another name now. Satanists, which, the Satanists, they have their Baphomet symbolism, which Baphomet is the very epitome of dualism. He represents about every dualistic aspect that you can think of. And there's a little bit of this in the New Age movement, and obviously in Wicca with its god and goddess worship. And this stuff is found all over the place in all kinds of worldviews, like Taoism and just Chinese philosophy in general with the yin and the yang. That's dualism. But really one of the main focuses of this video will be me trying to show this elitist group, these Illuminati, how they put their religious beliefs directly into pop culture through movies, video games, and things like that. And, I want to explain a little bit what their belief system is so that you can recognize it and see it for what it is, because it's a religion. It's their belief system. And just like any other religion or belief system, it can be evaluated and critiqued. And the reason no one's done that so far is because it's esoteric. It's hidden knowledge. They keep it secret for just this reason, to avoid it being utterly refuted. Because when someone takes their crazy religious beliefs, like Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, and they take them out into the public, what happens? Over a period of time, people just come along, that have their own belief system, and they look at that, and they say, well, this part of it is just irrational, doesn't make sense. And the same thing can be done with the Illuminati and their religious belief. So the first thing I'm going to do is explain what they believe, but also keep in mind, they don't just put it out there like it's just something you can watch and be like, well, there it is, that's what they believe. It's always secretive, hidden, esoteric, the way that they do things. It's, it's sneaky even. And like I was saying, there's a few reasons for why they do that. One is so that no one can critique what they're saying. And then even when you do critique it, people think you're a madman because you're seeing these things in movies or whatever content they're putting it in. And another reason for keeping it hidden and secret is their ego. They think that they're special, they're the illuminated ones, the enlightened ones. Even while I'm recording this, I'm using quotation fingers. But they take great pride in the fact that they have this special knowledge. And for people outside, it makes it more appealing actually when it's this mystery and this secret that you get to know. And it almost overrides the fact that it's utter nonsense, that everything that they're saying is completely irrational. It overrides that, the fact that it's this hidden secret that you get to know. And so let me show you what they believe, and then after that I'll critique it like it should have been a million times by now. But let me define dualism really quick. In the way that they believe it, it means the equality of opposites. And not only that, it also means that the existence of one thing hinges upon the existence of its opposite. So it's almost like the two opposites are one whole. You can't have one without the other. Like you always hear them saying things like, you can't have good without evil, or you can't have light without dark. And so like the yin and the yang would be a perfect representation of that. You have these two opposites that form one whole, and that's how they view reality. That reality is made up of opposites, and that these opposites form our reality, and that if you took one of the opposites away, you wouldn't be able to have the other one. But most people who get into studying this kind of topic with the whole Illuminati and the many facets of that have already noticed these dualistic portrayals in the content that they're making. And I would say it goes beyond that. It's not just about the traditional dualism that most people are thinking about. It's not just about equality of achieve opposites. It's not just about opposites balancing one another out. No, it goes beyond that. So what they believe is kind of like the Hegelian dialectic. So in the Hegelian dialectic, you have the thesis and then you have its antithesis. So you have something and then its opposite, essentially. But then in the Hegelian dialectic, it doesn't stop there. Those don't just sit there opposed to each other. In the Hegelian dialectic, you merge the two, the thesis and the antithesis, and you achieve synthesis from that. It's like you take the two opposites, you combine them and merge them into one. And don't get me wrong here, this isn't like the yin-yang, where you have, the white side and the black side, and there's a little bit of the yin in the yang, there's a little bit of yang in the yin. No, what they're talking about is actually commingling all of it. They would take the white side and the black side and just completely amalgamate all of it into one, so that you would almost have like a gray circle, and that's all that would be left. They're not talking about the balancing of opposites. They're talking about taking opposites and making them into one new whole. So that's the difference between your traditional dualism and what they're teaching. And they call this the great work. Aleister Crowley taught this, and people that influenced him and all kinds of people in the occult have been teaching this for a long time. That essentially, and here's the big kicker, the thing that they won't tell you, they believe that when you finish this great work, and what the great work is combining and merging, synthesizing all opposites into one whole. And they believe that when you complete this great work, that you'll achieve apotheosis, that man will become God. And even that in and of itself is the same dualism that we were just talking about. God and man are complete opposites, and that's what they're trying to achieve with the great work. They're trying to merge the two and make them one. But the crazy thing is how they actually plan to accomplish all this. And you have to view it through the eyes of Gnosticism, because like I said, they're Gnostics. And what Gnostics believe is the physical realm is actually just a construct. It's not the real realm. There's actually a realm above it filled with gods and goddesses. And the lowest of all the gods and goddesses, Sophia, created the demiurge. And demiurge means the creator. The demiurge is the one who created this construct, the physical realm. And they would say that he is the God of the Old Testament. And they would say also that he's a deceiver. He's trying to deceive mankind into believing that he's the only God. And actually, the Gnostics would say there are many gods and goddesses above him. And actually, there's another realm beyond the pleroma, where the source God, I wouldn't even call him God because he's not a person, he's actually just a force. And essentially everything comes out from him. All those gods and goddesses down the line come from him. What they believe about the demiurge, though, is that he's dualistic in and of himself. He's composed of opposites. He's chaos and order. He's both evil and good. And so they'll view this one whole demiurge as if he consists of these two opposing forces, and the one side would be evil and order, which order to them is kind of a negative thing, and they view it as kind of a breach of nature, of the natural way of things. And then you have the good and chaotic side, and the evil and orderly side would be represented by Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, who they more often refer to as Adonai, which Adonai is a Hebrew word that you're going to find over and over again in the Old Testament. It's the word Lord. It's the capital L, lowercase O-R-D, the all uppercase Lord, that would be Yahweh. And then they would see the personification of good and chaos as being, oddly enough, Lucifer. And, this all goes back to that Lucifer mythos I was talking about in my Owl and Baphomet video, where the serpent is the hero in Gnosticism. He comes and he rescues mankind. He sets them free from their enslavement to Adonai. And I know some of you are probably thinking, like, how could anybody believe that? It's practically Satanism. And so I want to show some quotes from some high-level Freemasons who are very respected in Freemasonry. A lot of times people will disavow Albert Pike, though, because his writings are so clear and right to the point that, they basically have to disavow him or else they look like Satanists. So don't be swayed by people who tell you that Albert Pike doesn't represent what Freemasonry teaches and all that stuff, because half the time the people who tell you that, they may be Freemasons, but they're probably very low-level Freemasons, and they haven't been initiated into the kind of things that Pike and other high-level Freemasons, 33rd degree Freemasons, had knowledge of. I'll link a video in the description that pretty much destroys that. But this is what he says. Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai is also God, for the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black, for the absolute can only exist as two gods. And so you can see that just stinks of that dualism that I was talking about before. And there you have Adonai and Lucifer as the two gods. And then he continues on at the bottom. The true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. And there you have Albert Pike pretty much preaching that Lucifer is the savior of mankind, that he's the one that's trying to set them free from the evil Adonai, the God of the Old Testament. But just to show that this isn't some special doctrine only taught by crazy Albert Pike, here's another quote from a 33rd degree Freemason. His name is Domincio Margiotta. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. He says that Palladiism, which Palladiism would come from the Greek word Palos, which that's a Greek goddess of wisdom. She's basically synonymous with Minerva and Athena. And, you know, that connects back to my Owl and Baphomet video having to do with the Lucifer mythos and the whole flame of wisdom. And that's why they're calling themselves the Illuminati. They're illuminated, enlightened by wisdom that's from Lucifer. But he says Palladiism is necessarily a Luciferian rite. Its religion is Manichaean neo-Gnosticism, teaching that the divinity is dual and that Lucifer is equal of Adonai, with Lucifer, the god of light and goodness, struggling for humanity against Adonai, the god of darkness and evil. And so you see it's the same exact thing that Albert Pike was saying, but here even it goes a little bit farther. It's saying that it's dual, that they're one whole. They're not just these two separate gods. It's that they're one whole god together. They're dualistic. And that's one of the reasons they are trying to accomplish the great work. And like I said, the great work is synthesizing all opposites. And the reason they want to do that is because the demiurge's creation reflects him. It reflects his duality. So that this physical realm that we live in, the construct that he created, it essentially is made up of many, many, many dualistic elements. And you have the mind and the body, you have the male and the female, you have light and dark, fire and water. Many opposing forces is what makes up his domain. And they think that if they collapse all these dualistic elements, if they synthesize them and merge them all together into one, that eventually it'll collapse his realm. And not only his realm, it'll collapse him in on himself, and he will cease to exist. And that will open the gate, the door, the portal to the higher realm where the pleroma is. And that's all the aeons, the gods and goddesses that come out from the source, who the Gnostics would call the Father, or the pneuma, which means spirit in Greek. And essentially when they achieve synthesis of all things in this realm, then it will collapse in on itself. It will destroy the demiurge, and it will free mankind from this prison that he has ensnared them in. And then they will ascend into the higher realm and merge with the pleroma. They will become aeons, gods and goddesses. And essentially when Lucifer in the garden told them, "Ye shall be as gods," that's what they think he meant. When they say they're illuminated ones, that's what they're referring to. They have that knowledge. And this all comes from Sophia, which Sophia means wisdom. And she is essentially behind Lucifer in the garden saying that. And she sent Jesus with this gnosis to help us to escape the snare of the demiurge. And you would think that that's kind of odd that the demiurge would be in on destroying himself. But you have to remember that Lucifer is the chaotic side of the demiurge. He actually takes joy in destruction, in undoing things, in rebellion. And so he's actually rebelling against himself. And you also have to remember that Lucifer is the good part of the demiurge, so he sympathizes with the humans because he realizes that their enslavement to the demiurge is wrong, and so he actually wants to free them. And again, just to show you that I'm not making this stuff up as I go, I'm going to quote to you from a Gnostic text that was found at Nag Hammadi, and it's called On the Origin of the World, so you can go look it up for yourself. But it says this in there: "She," and that would refer to Sophia, "will cast them down into the abyss. They," and here they refers to the archons, which are kind of like the demiurge's henchmen that he created for himself. So they will be obliterated because of their wickedness, for they will come to be like volcanoes and consume one another until they perish at the hand of the prime parent. Prime parent there refers to the demiurge who created them. But then it says, when he has destroyed them, he will turn against himself and destroy himself until he ceases to exist. And so you can see that this ancient Gnostic text is actually teaching the exact same thing I was saying, that the demiurge actually destroys himself in the end. But I'm sure some of you are sitting there by now and thinking, this is absolutely insane. And I would agree with that diagnosis 110%, because it is insane. But I'm sure also some of you are a bit confused because this whole topic is pretty mind-numbing with the pneuma and the pleroma and Sophia, the demiurge. All these things may be new to some of you, and so I will leave a link in the description below to a video where Dr. Michael Heiser does like an 8-hour seminar on Gnosticism, and he explains all those things that I was talking about, the demiurge and the pleroma and the source, the father, pneuma, spirit thing, lots of other stuff. I know I said it's 8 hours, but in the introduction he goes over those things pretty quickly, and so the link will just be in the description. But now I want to jump into the section where I actually show you, by looking at the content that they actually create, like movies and TV shows and video games, that these are the things that they believe. Because it's a lot easier to simply say that they believe these crazy things than actually show it. And so I actually want to take a look at all these things that they're producing so that you can see they're putting these ideas into their content. And the reason that they are doing that is because they want to slowly indoctrinate more and more people. It's like when you tell a fictional story and it's nonsensical, at first people reject it offhandedly. But the more you tell it and the more you put it in front of them, especially in this way, like subconsciously, they're speaking and teaching you on a subconscious level that these things are not absurd, that it's not crazy to think this, and that's how they get you. They keep showing it to you over and over and over and over again, until finally, because you've seen it so many times, it starts to seem plausible, like that actually could be the way it is, that could be the truth. But in reality, it's just that same absurdity from before. It's just now been wrapped in something appealing, and that is your favorite movie, or your favorite game, or your favorite book, or your favorite TV show. So that essentially what they've done is they've sugarcoated this lie, this absurdity, that if you would have heard it on its own, you would have rejected it wholeheartedly. But now they bring it to you wrapped in bows, and you swallow the whole thing, sugar-coatedness and the poisonous center, the lie, the absurdity that you would have never accepted on its own. So to begin, just let me list here some content that is generally considered to have Gnostic elements in it. What I've tried to do here, though, is categorize them by each individual Gnostic element that appears in it. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it should give you some idea of how prevalent this kind of thing is in Hollywood. I mean, a lot of these are huge, multi-million-dollar movies. You'll notice, though, that the most reoccurring theme is the Gnostic construct idea. I think the reason you see that one more than anything else is because they use it as a kind of fear tactic to manipulate people. I mean, think about it. They're propagating this fear of being trapped in some kind of uber prison. I mean, that's probably a huge reason for the explosion of Orwellian-type movies in general. They achieve that same kind of fear without the obvious Gnostic overtones found in these movies I've listed. It's all about creating a fear-filled atmosphere, though, so that eventually they can cash in on that by revealing what they'll call the true Orwellian nightmare, the universal Big Brother, which would be the construct. They're basically embedding in people's minds this overwhelming urge to escape, even before they really know what they have to escape from or whether they're actually even trapped in the first place. And this really sets up people to more readily accept Gnosticism, since Gnostic teaching then becomes the cure to the disease that the Gnostics intentionally infected the public with in the first place. But I want to single out some of these that I listed and show how some of the deeper things that I talked about are actually expressed in them. I don't really have time to touch on them all. This video is probably going to run long enough as it is, so I'll leave a link in the description to Good Fight Ministries video called Hollywood's War on God, which is all about exposing Gnosticism in movies. So check that out if you're interested in more stuff like this. So the first movie I want to jump to is The Matrix, which it's actually a trilogy of movies, but as most of you probably already know, it all starts out with the main character Neo being unknowingly trapped in a type of computer simulation of Earth known as the Matrix. It's even called a prison for the mind by one of the characters.
Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
But you have some duality symbolism sprinkled throughout the Matrix movies, like checkerboard flooring, the famous red and blue pill scene from the first Matrix, and one character even wears yin-yang earrings in the third movie, which is significant when you realize the Gnostic character she's playing. But you have the demiurge from Gnosticism making an appearance in the second and third movies. The character called the Architect is essentially this machine or program that's the creator of the Matrix and who has enslaved all mankind within it. Though in the second movie he actually speaks about a co-creator.
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. The Oracle. If I am the father of the Matrix, she would undoubtedly be its mother.
And she's actually the one I mentioned who wears the dualistic earrings, the yin-yangs. But these two co-creators seem to portray the Gnostic belief in the dual demiurge that I was talking about before. But what's more is that the name architect for the demiurge character is pretty telling and more than appropriate, since demiurge can be translated into many English words like architect. For example, it could be translated as fashioner or artisan, craftsman, creator, designer, and plenty of other synonyms of words like those, which would obviously include architect. So architect is definitely one way to refer to the Gnostic demiurge. But even more telling is that the Freemasons, who as I said in the beginning are just neo-Gnostics, neo meaning new, but they actually refer to the demiurge as the grand architect, so it would seem that at least some Gnostics prefer the translation. But the architect in the movie is portrayed as this calculating, evil genius whose only flaw is his obsession with perfection.
The first Matrix I designed was quite naturally perfect. It was a work of art, flawless, sublime, a triumph equaled only by its monumental failure. I have since come to understand that the answer eluded me because it required a lesser mind, or perhaps a mind less bound by the parameters of perfection.
While the Oracle's character is portrayed as much more of a free spirit, you know, smoking cigarettes, baking cookies, and occasionally assisting humans in the upheaval of the Matrix she helped to create. So, she's rebelling against the system she helped put in place. Sounds slightly familiar, you know, like Lucifer, supposed co-demiurge, yet notorious rebel, who's fighting for mankind against his dualistic counterpart. But that's not all. The rabbit hole goes deeper still. And yes, that was a Matrix pun. So in the third and final movie, we come to a point where Neo actually approaches the physical architect that resides outside the Matrix, known as the Deus Ex Machina, which quite fittingly literally means God out of the machine. But the first time Neo met the architect, it was in the second movie, and he was within the Matrix, and let's just say he was much more pleasant. So essentially, long story short, Neo enters the Matrix by being plugged directly into the Deus Ex Machina, or the architect, essentially becoming tethered to him while inside the Matrix. It's kind of like he's walking around with the architect inside him or something, but simultaneous to all this, Neo's arch nemesis throughout the movies, Agent Smith, has basically, I guess, possessed or assimilated is a way to say it, every single person in the Matrix. But the last person we see him assimilate is the Oracle character.
The great and powerful Oracle we meet at last.
So essentially both Neo and Smith in the Matrix have become the host bodies for the two aspects of the dual demiurge. Then there's this huge fight between Neo and Smith, and in the end, Agent Smith assimilates Neo, and he merges with him in a sense. But essentially, when Smith does this, Neo, like the others who have been assimilated, morphs into a kind of clone of Agent Smith. Then we see a scene that's outside the Matrix where the architect, the Deus Ex Machina, shoots this light into Neo's actual body, and it goes into the Matrix and comes out of the assimilated Neo. Then the Smith clone that had assimilated the Oracle and who was fighting with Neo this whole time, he begins to do the same thing and eventually bursts into a massive explosion of light. And then all these onlooking Agent Smiths who were clones, they've just been watching this fight the whole time, they follow suit and they all begin to explode in perfect unison. So in the end, this kills both Neo and Smith, but it frees the human population trapped in the Matrix. So if you're paying attention, we see nearly every element I mentioned is in play here. We have the obvious allusion to the construct in the form of the Matrix. We have the dual demiurge in the form of the Oracle and the Architect, who, based upon their characteristic personalities, obviously allude to Abaddon and Lucifer. And then we have their being synthesized together through the merger of Neo and Smith, the two demiurges' incarnations, in a sense, which ends in their destruction and brings about the freedom of mankind from the construct, the Matrix. So you see, that's quite in step with what I was talking about. But another movie that shows similar elements to these is Tron Legacy. So in this one you have the creator of what's called the Grid, whose name is Flynn, and at one point he's even called a deity.
Together, we have achieved a great many things. We've created a vast, complex system. We have rid it of its imperfection. Not to mention, rid it of the false deity who sought to enslave us. Captain Flynn! Where are you now?
But then you have his co-creator, Clue, who Flynn actually made to help him, quote, create the perfect system, which is referring to his task of maintaining the grid. And this so-called grid is essentially a digital universe within a computer. So clearly in that you have the construct idea again, and with Flynn and Clue, you have the dual demiurge concept as well. But eventually Flynn's co-creator, Clue, backfires on him, and he ends up betraying him because of his obsession with perfection and order. Yet, counter to this, Flynn is portrayed as another free-spirited type hippie guy who's constantly spouting Buddhist philosophy. So he, like the Oracle, would seem to portray the Luciferian, chaotic half of the demiurge.
Chaos. Good news.
There's also this dualistic color scheme of opposing oranges and blues that's all throughout the movie. And of course, orange characters are always bad guys, and blue characters are always good guys. But Clue, after his betrayal, always appears in orange, and Flynn always appears with this blue theme. So anyway, after Clue's betrayal, Flynn becomes trapped in the grid, and then his son also finds his way and becomes trapped. And in the end, the only way his son is able to escape the grid is by Flynn merging with his co-creator, Clue, a process referred to as reintegration in the movie.
How can he be so afraid of his own creation? I mean, he built Clue. Why doesn't he just end him?
He could, but it would require reintegration.
Yeah, all right.
Flynn would never survive the event. It would mean the end of them both.
And to reintegrate literally means to bring together or to combine divided parts into a single whole, which is obviously the synthesis idea again. But when the two dramatically reintegrate with one another at the end, as expected, they both die by this massive explosion, which ends up destroying the grid and allows for Flynn's son to escape through what's called, quote, the portal in the movie. So again, here we see the dualistic demiurge synthesis, resulting in his demise as well as the destruction of the construct. But we also see an allusion to man's escape from the construct and his ascension to the higher realm in the form of the sun's escape. There's also this telltale sign of Gnostic influence in the movie that I can't help but point out before moving on.
Head towards the light, Cora.
This is a sign from the pleroma that you can come back. Just follow the light. Isn't that a nice phrase we've all heard in our culture? Follow the light. It's Gnostic. You follow the light and you will make it back to the pleroma.
But another film with some of these same elements is the Lego Movie. The movie is centered around a Lego character named Emmett, who is supposedly the chosen one, or something. But he runs around throughout the movie with his little Lego friends, trying to stop this evil Lego villain called President Business, who is also called Lord Business. As you can probably guess, it's more of a kid's movie. But we find out at one point that the Lego universe that the movie has taken place in up to this point is actually just this huge Lego set in the basement of some guy's house, and that all the Lego characters that appeared up till now are just Lego figurines in this guy's massive Lego set. So in that we have this allusion to the construct in the form of the Lego world this guy has made in his basement. Then our world plays the role of the pleroma, that is, the higher realm again, which in this higher realm we have the creator of the Lego set, or the demiurge, if you will, played by the comedic actor Will Ferrell. He's really just what looks like an average business guy who seems to have an addiction to Legos, but he's literally called the man upstairs a ton of times throughout the movie by these Lego figurines, which is an obvious allusion to him being the god figure to these inhabitants of the Lego universe.
If the man upstairs chose him to be the special, there must be a reason.
Who's the man upstairs?
See? He doesn't even know about the man upstairs.
Does he have like super gross hands that look like they're made out of big pink sausages? Like eagle talons mixed with squid?
Wait, you've seen
The man upstairs.
But it's also at this point that we find out that this guy's son has actually been tampering with his Lego set, building all kinds of things in the Lego universe without his father's permission. And the dad actually is pretty upset because he's obsessive about keeping his Legos in perfect order, and his son is actually pretty chaotic when he's playing with them.
No, this is a disaster. All of this that you see before you is all your father's. And everything is thought out. It's a highly sophisticated interlocking brick system. What am I holding here?
It's a battleship.
No, it's a hodgepodge. That's what it is. What's Batman doing on it? What is this, a robot pirate?
And so the son is obviously portrayed as being more free-spirited, promoting Lego anarchy by making a mess of his dad's Lego set. But obviously in this father and son creator duo, we have another allusion to the dual demiurge, and they obviously have those familiar chaotic and orderly personalities attributed to Adonai and Lucifer by the Gnostics. Similar to the Matrix though, the father and son seem to have their own representative in the Lego universe. The father's representative is the villain, Lord Business, who is actually voiced by the same actor as the dad, Will Ferrell, and they both have the same perfectionist-like mentality.
All the people of the universe were once free to travel and mingle and build whatever they wanted. But President Business was confused by all the chaos, so he erected walls between the worlds and became obsessed with order and perfection.
All I'm asking for is total perfection.
The son's representative seems to be Emmett, though. I say this because at the end, when the son and his dad are reconciling, Lord Business and Emmett are simultaneously reconciling. The father figure even asks his son, quote, if the construction guy, referring to Emmett, said something to President Business, what would he say? And he actually does this in an attempt to get his son to tell him what's bothering him. But then it cuts to Emmett appealing to Lord Business about not being so obsessive about the order of the Lego universe, which is simultaneously meant to be the son's appeal to the dad not to oppress his plane with his Lego set. Then there's this scene where they're reconciled and the dad hugs his son, and simultaneously in the Lego universe we see Lord Business hugging Emmett. So pretty clearly Emmett represents the son's character. But I think this event where the son and the father reconcile and unite in a hug is meant to picture that synthesis of the two demiurge figures. Though obviously it's much more watered down than the other portrayals we've seen of it. But after this, and a bit of an explosion, the Lego universe and its inhabitants are freed from the oppression of Lord Business and his stringent rules about what they can and can't build. And the father also then allows his son to continue his chaotic building with his Lego set. Really, I could do an entire commentary on this movie explaining how Luciferian it is, but for time's sake, I'll just outline the allusions to the elements we've been discussing. So we saw the construct portrayed in the form of the Lego universe. We saw that its Lego inhabitants were oppressed by a perfectionist-type Adonai character who's actually called Lord throughout the film, Lord being the literal translation of Adonai. We also had his son playing the role of the chaotic rebel and co-creator Lucifer, together the two representing the dual demiurge figure that we've discussed. And in the end, the two are unified, which frees the Legos and the construct from oppression. And so yet again, we find many of those same elements here. But the last one I'll mention briefly is actually a video game from the Elder Scrolls series. Elder Scrolls is probably best known for its 5th installment called Skyrim, but the game I'm going to address is the 4th installment, Oblivion, specifically the Shivering Isles add-on. And an add-on, for those who don't know, basically means it wasn't a part of the original game when it first came out, but it was released later as a downloadable addition to the game. So the add-on's name, Shivering Isles, actually refers to the location where the events of the storyline take place. It's essentially this island that the player reaches by teleporting out of the original game world and into the so-called Oblivion realm. Oddly enough, though, the island is highly dualistic in nature because it's actually split into two opposing halves. One half is called Mania and the other Dementia, and the Dementia side of the island is always gloomy and filled with bogs and marshland and stuff like that, while the Mania half of the island looks like this beautiful, lush forest and fall. I mean, even many of the enemies you find are actually color-coded to match the specific region they inhabit. So you may find the same monster on either side of the island, but it will be darker colored if it's in Dementia and lighter if you find it in Mania. But there's even this dualistic city at the center of the island, and it's split right down the middle between the two districts called Bliss, which is the Mania half of town, so it's always bright and cheery. But then there's Crucible, which is the Dementia half, so it's pretty much like a sewer runoff. And then there's the Palace Grounds part of the city, where the dualism continues, and again it's split right down the middle between the two districts. Then there's the Throne Room, which you can see is also highly dualistic, but in it sits the ruler of the Shivering Isles, Sheogorath. And Sheogorath in the game is actually what's called a Daedric Prince, which is essentially a deity of sorts, but specifically he's referred to as the Daedric Prince of Madness, which makes perfect sense because he's quite insane and has an odd obsession with cheese.
Time for a celebration! Cheese for everyone!
Hence, he's actually called the Mad God many times throughout the game. Beyond that, his personality is that of a lover of chaotic mischief and disarray, and what's more, he's actually the creator of this dualistic island. So here again, we obviously have allusions to the demiurge and his creation, the construct. But as with the others, the Gnostic overtones don't stop there. So the player, pretty soon after beginning the Shivering Isles storyline, finds out that the island and its inhabitants are in danger from some enemy of Sher-Gorath's. This enemy is called Jigalag, and he's supposedly the Daedric Prince of Logical Order.
The Daedric Prince of Order. Or biscuits. No, order.
And he actually plans on capturing the island, destroying it, and then recreating it in perfect order. And so again, we have what seems like the Gnostic portrayal of Adonai and Lucifer in the form of these two enemies, one being the chaotic rebel and the other being this obsessive perfectionist. And yet the plot thickens. The player eventually learns that Sheogorath and Jigalag are actually the same person. So Sheogorath, the Prince of Madness, at the end of every supposed era, in werewolf-like fashion, he turns into this Prince of Order Jigalag, and he destroys his own creation in the hopes of re-establishing it in perfect order.
Sheogorath is dead! All shall crumble before Jigalag!
So the two characters actually turn out to be the same person. And so this construct-like realm of Sheogorath is simultaneously the realm of Jigalag. And so yet again, we have this allusion to the dualistic demiurge. Though the game does seem to lack an obvious concept of the two being united through some kind of synthesis. But technically, since they're the same person anyway, they're already unified in some sense. Nevertheless, the game does play another card from the Gnostic teaching I discussed earlier. When you defeat Jigalag, oddly enough, your in-game character becomes the Mad God Sheogorath.
You now hold the mantle of madness. I will take my leave, and you will remain here, mortal. Mortal, king, god. It seems uncertain. This realm is yours. Fare thee well, Sheogorath, Prince of Madness.
So essentially the player becomes the god of the Shivering Isles. There's even a character in the game who literally calls this process apotheosis.
You seek the throne of madness. However, no mortal may sit upon the throne without the staff, but apotheosis is no simple matter, and the creation of the staff is no simple task.
So think about this. Here we have embedded in this game the Gnostic teaching that upon defeating Jigalag, who is an obvious portrayal of Adonai, that you become a god yourself. This sounds too much like what Satan told Eve in the garden, that men can become gods. I mean, is it any wonder why these Gnostics have to be so shady about all this? Obviously, no one's going to accept this kind of stuff outright. That's why they have to hide it in their content like this. They're doing this to precondition the masses to accept this kind of satanic ideology without even knowing it. But from there, I want to point out some other familiar content that you can see these same kinds of ideas popping up in. So to begin, in Freemasonry, you have the very crest of their organization seemingly representative of this dual demiurge. And so if you look at it, you see the compass and the square set opposite one another, which the two actually represent opposites in architecture. One is used to produce curved lines, and the other right angles. They appear to be merging together, though, to form what looks like a hexagram. Which you can see in this piece of Masonic art, they actually portray the same symbolism using an actual hexagram. Hexagram itself, though, is a symbol of the merger of opposites like that of earth and heaven, or the microcosm and the macrocosm, or even man and God. Which there are many symbols out there that represent the same kind of idea. But notice in this hexagram, though, that the merger of the two opposite halves is being stressed by showing them as interlocking with one another. But the hexagram as a symbol quite literally means as above, so below, which is a concept found in Hermeticism and sacred geometry, and so of course it finds a place in the syncretism of Gnosticism. The phrase, though, originates with the 6th to 8th century pseudepigraphical work called the Emerald Tablet. Second line of which reads, "That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing," which this seems to be alluding to the merger of the microcosm and the macrocosm, as I mentioned before, apparently for the purpose of accomplishing the, quote, one thing. Strange way of putting it, but it seems to be saying the below and the above are unified to become one whole, which is obviously just another occult teaching about the great work. But back to the Freemasonic seal, and you can see the capital G in the center of the compass and square, which stands for Grand or Great Architect. And as I mentioned earlier, architect is synonymous with the word demiurge, being an appropriate translation for it. I also get the sneaking suspicion, though, that it may double as an abbreviation for the great work, which would also be well represented by the merger of the opposing compass and square, which in the end, the purpose of the great work is to synthesize smaller opposing forces leading up to the ultimate synthesis of the demiurge. So really, either way, it's an allusion to the same thing. Another thing, though, that might actually hint towards this being an allusion to that dual demiurge is a symbol that I actually noticed in the House of the Temple, which is a Freemasonic temple in Washington, D.C. And this isn't just any Freemasonic temple, it's actually the headquarters of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and the bones of Albert Pike are actually entombed there at that temple. And so yet again, those Freemasons who want to disavow Albert Pike, I mean, they have that to wrestle with, that Albert Pike is actually entombed at such a highly recognized Freemasonic temple there in Washington, D.C. But the thing I want to point out in that temple is that there's actually this rare compass and square Freemasonic symbol on one of the walls there. It's in between two hexagrams. But the reason I say that the symbol is rare is because if you look at it in the picture here, you can see the square on the bottom is elongated on the left half. Now, that's not rare for a square, because you see squares all the time that are longer on one end than another, but it is rare for the Freemasonic compass and square to look this way, because I went through pictures of countless Freemasonic compass and squares, and I only found a few that looked like this. But the reason I point that out is because I'm actually willing to wager that the elongation of that left half is very intentional. It's because they're trying to make the square appear as if it is an L. And the reason they're doing that is because they're abbreviating for one half of the demiurge, Lucifer. And then the top half of the seal would allude to the A in Adonai. And so there you have Adonai and Lucifer merging together. And I'm sure there's probably some Freemason watching this saying, that's not at all what it means. And I would say to that, well, how do you know? It's a secret society that keeps secrets, even from its own members. I mean, look at the highest degree you can earn. It's literally called Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. You really think you know the, quote, royal secret that the 32nd degree Mason has privilege to? I'm willing to bet you don't. In fact, I'm willing to bet even the 32nd degree Mason isn't privileged to know all the secrets of Freemasonry. Matter of fact, I'm willing to bet a Mason learns something new with every single rank he gains. So I really don't want to hear Freemasons pretending to speak in some kind of place of authority about Freemasonry, because frankly, you voluntarily had the wool pulled over your eyes as soon as you join a secret society. They keep secrets. That's their thing. What makes you think they don't keep secrets from you? So anyways, the seal here seems to be a very clear allusion to the synthesis of two opposites, and beyond that, it's even branded with a symbol that admittedly refers to the demiurge. You can't get much clearer than that. But to really drive the point home that this symbol represents the dual demiurge, take a look at these sketches by the infamous occultist Eliphas Levi. The one on the right is pretty basic. It's like a diamond split in half with two opposing faces, likely the opposed demiurges. But you also have the clashing color scheme reflected one against another, and you can actually see some poorly drawn Hebrew letters at the top and bottom of the diamond. The top one looks most like an Aleph, which may be an abbreviation for Adonai, Aleph being the first letter in his name in the Hebrew Old Testament. The bottom one, though, could be a misshapen nun, which Nakash, the Hebrew word for serpent used in Genesis 3 to refer to Satan, that begins with the letter nun. Can't really be too sure one way or the other, though, since Hebrew here is pretty sloppy. But if that is what these Hebrew letters represent, then it's kind of like that Freemasonic compass and square that I already showed, where it abbreviated for Adonai and Lucifer. And so this could be a similar thing. But you can see the picture on the left is actually a hexagram, which is clearly portraying the two opposing demiurge figures and merging together in the center. And you can also see written in Latin at the top right corner, macrocosm, and in the bottom left corner, microcosm. Also in the top left corner is the Latin phrase meaning the top is like the bottom, or more loosely, as above, so below. So again, we have obvious allusions to the great work here. But something new you see there is the serpent around the outer edge, and it's forming a circle, and it's eating its own tail, and that's called the Ouroboros, which hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. But the symbol pictures this similar dualistic synthesis in that the snake lives by eating its own tail. And so in the occult it represents life being sustained by death, the two opposing forces sustaining one another, essentially. But your children know Ouroboros as the circle of life, courtesy of the Lion King. So in the symbol we have both life and death coming together as one whole. Hopefully you're starting to see the pattern here. I mean, it's over and over again with this idea of the synthesis of opposites. The plurality becomes singularity, the many become one, the disjointed become joined, diversity becomes university, and over and over and over again we're just bombarded with this kind of synthesis symbolism. This all really shouldn't be too surprising though, since Eliphas Levi is the same occultist behind the infamous Baphomet portrait, which I'm willing to bet this dualistic monstrosity is also an allusion to the synthesized demiurge, or at the very least the great work, because it's basically an amalgamation of opposites from head to toe. You have male and female, animal and human, demon and angel, light and dark, the two opposing serpents, potentially alluding to the dualistic tree of knowledge of good and evil from the Genesis narrative where the serpent tempted Eve, which makes you think it's no wonder occultists have an obsession with dualism. Lucifer's been all about it since day one, hanging out in this dualistic tree. But notice his arms say solve and coagula, which is a Latin phrase, solve meaning separate and coagula meaning joined together, and it's an alchemical maxim referring to the fusion of things in disunity, which again is an obvious allusion to the great work, and especially so since Levi himself wrote extensively on the great work. But another dualistic representation of the demiurge that comes to mind is this early Gnostic picture carved on a gem, which this is just a facsimile, so it's not really the same quality as the original. But notice the opposing moon and star, that is moon and sun, because the ancients would often depict the sun in that way. So this would be an allusion to the two opposed forces of night and day. They may actually be depicted as conjoined together though behind the figure's head, with the sun rays being obvious, but the crescent may be that thin circle that disappears behind the creature's neck, making a possible allusion to the crescent shape. If you recall though, Baphomet seemed to have the allusion to the moon and the sun as well. He actually points to the two as if they're what the Latin words on his arms are referring to when they say separate, thus hinting they need to be joined together, which the sun and moon symbolism seems to be a very common way to refer to the two demiurges, as we'll see as we get a little farther on. But the demiurge figure here is portrayed as a serpent with a lion's head, which the serpent is an obvious allusion to Satan or Lucifer, while Adonai is portrayed as a lion in several passages throughout the Old Testament. So here yet again we see the demiurge portrayed in this dualistic manner with allusions to both Satan and Adonai. But another Freemasonic symbol that seemingly portrays the dualistic demiurge is the two-headed phoenix, especially since it has that familiar Ordo ab Chao quote on it. The Latin phrase means order out of chaos. It possibly refers to the opposing personalities of the two demiurges, that is, orderly and chaotic, or it may be synonymous with the United States motto found in the Great Seal, E pluribus unum, meaning out of many one, which sounds oh so familiar again. This is clearly just another allusion to the great work. I mean, you have the combining of a plurality of opposites into a single whole, and so this is likely what the slogan Ordo ab Chao refers to as well. That is, creating an orderly state of oneness out of a mass, chaotic state of opposites. But there's also the two pillars in Freemasonry, and I think here again we have another allusion to the dual demiurge with these, which often you have the two pillars portrayed in this opposing fashion to one another, one pillar being colored white and the other black, or on some rare occasions one pillar will be red and the other will be blue. And the two are actually based off the two biblical pillars named Boaz and Jashan that are located outside of Solomon's temple, though in the Bible they're not really depicted as being dualistic in a clear way. In fact, they're barely mentioned at all, really. Another thing about the pillars is the familiar sun and moon symbolism we spoke briefly about before. The two are very often hovering nearby the two pillars, with the sun characteristically near the left pillar and the moon near the right, though in some cases they rest individually upon their corresponding pillars. And as I pointed out before though, the sun and moon seem to represent the two demiurge figures and their their opposed natures. Also think about the connection between Lucifer, which means light bearer, and the moon. A light bearer would refer to something that holds light, like a lampstand, but not an actual source of light, much like the moon and its reflection of the light emitted by the sun. But in other cases, you have the earth on one pillar and a globe containing space on the other. This is a plain reference to the microcosm represented by earth and the macrocosm represented by the heavens. But the way the synthesis of the two demiurges is represented in all this is by connecting the two pillars by application of what's called the royal arch on top of the two. And as you can see in this Freemasonic art, the arch is actually made up of several opposing blocks meant to counterbalance each other's weight until the last block can be placed right there in the center. This all likely represents the process of the great work being carried out. The farther out blocks represent smaller micro opposites that must be synthesized in order to reach the eventual macro synthesis of the demiurge. Something worth note here, though, is that the Masonic quote, royal secret that I talked about earlier, probably relates to this royal arch and what it represents. That is, the goal of the great work, the synthesis of the demiurge. And so the Freemasonic royal secret probably refers to that. And so you got to get all the way to the 32nd degree to get this kind of knowledge. And so I can't blame the Freemason who hasn't heard of this before. But I'll touch more on the royal arch here in a moment. And so what's symbolized by the placing of an arch upon the pillars is that it goes from just being these two random pillars to creating a doorway or gateway for someone to pass through, which pictures the opening of the portal for the ascension of man, which relates back to what we discussed before, where the two demiurges being synthesized opens the portal for escape from the construct. This same kind of concept, though, is also pictured in the 101 symbolism that many have pointed out in things like The Matrix or George Orwell's 1984. The ones in the sequence depict the two pillars on either side, that is the two demiurges, and the 0 depicts the portal opening between the two. And you can actually see this kind of symbolism portrayed in some other places. For instance, in the 80s He-Man movie Masters of the Universe, you have here the two pillars and then the portal in the center, which in the movie the portal is called the Great Eye.
I stand before the great eye of the galaxy. More than man, more than life,
And so that eye symbol probably alludes to that portal that they're trying to open through synthesis. But this also connects to two other movies I'd point out. First, you have Ghostbusters, where you see the synthesis of the two opposites, male and female, in the form of the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper, which of course results in the opening of the portal. And we also see the Gatekeeper and the Keymaster seemingly depicted as two pillar figures along with the many other pillars in front of this infamous Illuminati pyramid. But then the portal opens right between the two around the center of the pyramid. And often in depictions of the triangle and all-seeing eye, the eye will appear at the center of the pyramid, or triangle shape. And so there we have what seems like a portal alluding to an eye, and also the two pillars with the portal between them. And so it's like that 101 symbolism, and also similar to this picture I showed, where you have the pillars and the royal arch representing synthesis, but then you have the eye symbol back there in the background behind the gate, picturing the opening of the portal from this process of synthesis by the application of the royal arch. But then you also have in the movie Stargate, we see that the final symbol used to open the portal is two lines separated at the bottom but converging at the top with a circle at the peak of the two. And so the two lines likely allude to the two pillars, that is the two demiurges, merging to open the portal above.
Well, the seventh actually isn't inside the cartouche, it's just below it here, designated by a little pyramid with two funny, neat little guys and funny little
And the portal being placed above is probably meant to picture the ascension of man when he enters through the portal. And the fact that the two pillars are merging at the top, it just kind of shows you that they're foregoing the picture of the arch, and they're representing the same symbolism. They're just representing it in a different way here. And you notice this is also quite similar to the 101 symbolism as well, just rearranged differently. And that's what I was saying before. They're using very similar symbolism here. It's just being reworked and used in different ways to represent the same thing. But notice it's also an allusion to the familiar eye and triangle symbolism as well, with the representation of the eye resting at the peak of the triangle, like on the back of the dollar bill, which that seal on the back of the dollar bill probably is picturing this exact same thing. I mean, think about it. You start out at the base, you have multiple bricks, and the higher up the structure you go, the less bricks there are. It's picturing the synthesis again until you get up to the portal that takes you to the higher realm. But something else of note here in Stargate is the connection to the Royal Arch. The bracket there on the Stargate seems to point to the center block of the Royal Arch, and it's being the final synthesis of the two pillars, because you can see in this picture the two look quite similar. Notice also the 69 symbol that I pointed out before on the Royal Arch. This is also a symbol of synthesis, and the portal also, if you think about it. And so what I mean is that 69 is often depicted as the merger of male and female, which the merger of male and female theoretically results in childbirth. And so the reason that's portal symbolism is because the occult will often overlap the opening of the woman's womb with the opening of the portal, if you catch my drift. I mean, they essentially see the child coming out of the womb as an allusion to ascending from a lower form of life to a higher form of life through a type of portal. But 69 can also allude to the yin-yang, since the two numbers seem to so effortlessly match the shape. And so you can see the 69 as a number is the perfect symbol to place there at the peak of the Royal Arch to depict synthesis. Either way though, it appears exactly where we'd expect it to, if this theory of mine is right. Because if you remember, the arch is the very symbol of merger between the two pillars, and this block at the peak is the final block needed to form the arch and complete synthesis. But I would even take this a step farther. If you look at the CERN logo, which CERN is very often associated with portal symbolism, you have the often noticed 666, which I would contend is relevant also, but I would point out that there's also a 69 there independent from the 666. And so it's obviously alluding to that synthesis again and the opening of the portal. I mean, not only that, but the whole purpose of the facility is to smash matter into matter. It's a particle collider. So maybe in that you have another connection to the synthesis of opposites. Or not. I don't know. But another thing related to the whole pillar symbolism is 9/11, and specifically the Twin Towers. I believe that to the Illuminati, or whatever we're calling them, the Twin Towers were symbolic of the two pillars of Freemasonry. One reason I say this is because of the day they chose to destroy them, which, if you don't believe that 9/11 was an inside job of some kind, I'd highly recommend that you watch the video I've linked in the description called Loose Change, and hopefully you'll at least keep an open mind about it. But the day they chose to destroy them on is significant because 9/11 in Roman numerals is IXXI, and as you can see, it actually forms a similar shape to the 101 we've already discussed. And as I said then, the 101 represents the two pillars on either side and the portal in the center, and obviously the same is true of this IXXI, so it's the allusion to a portal between the two pillars again. But more than that, we have the synthesis of the two towers, just like the two pillars. And what I mean is the two World Trade Center towers were intentionally destroyed to make way for the one World Trade Center. And yes, that's literally what it's called. Not anything ominous about that. But the One World Trade Center represents what's often called the third pillar, that is, the amalgamation of the first two pillars. And so, again, it's the same idea as the arch being placed on top of the two pillars. It's just another way of representing the same thing. Let me prove my point further, though, about this. Notice in this picture what seems to be an intentional connection made between the layout of the three towers and the layout of the three pyramids in Egypt. The reason I point that out is because the One World Trade Center is actually an elongated square antiprism, which you're probably wondering what on earth that means. And so a square antiprism consists of two pyramids that have been unfurled at their highest point and then interlocked one to another, as you can see in this clip. And so what I'm saying is the two pyramids that make up the new tower likely represent the twin towers. And so that One World Trade Center is a perfect representation of the two World Trade Center towers being synthesized into a single whole. Also, if that weren't enough, I mean, just think back to what I was saying about the name. The One World Trade Center, this whole ritual behind 9/11 in the tower is bigger than just buildings. It's a symbolic statement. The statement being made here is about the great work on a worldwide scale. Remember, these elite, they think this planet is just a construct, and that all of us are just in prison here. And so that's why they want this worldwide amalgamation, not just the combination of two buildings. They don't care about that. This is just a ritual to show their dedication to this great work, because they think if they achieve this, they'll destroy the construct along with the demiurge, and then they'll be set free to ascend. And obviously, given the massive death toll incurred on 9/11, they're willing to do just about anything to achieve that goal. And so the statement they're making there is, look, if we're gonna kill all these people just to put these two buildings together as some stupid symbol, how much more do you think we're willing to do to finish the actual great work? Because part of the great work is not synthesizing two buildings. That's nothing but a ritual. And so that means they're actually hard at work trying to bring about this great work. And so just think about some things that are occurring around you right now on a daily basis. Can you think of any ways that they're working to accomplish this goal in the world today? To show you one, let me just backtrack a tad. Before I mentioned that occasionally the two pillars are portrayed as red and blue, and often they use these types of blue and red as opposing colors for their dualistic symbolism, as we saw in Tron Legacy. But also, remember back to the Hegelian dialectic I showed. The thesis I represented with blue on white, and the antithesis I represented with red on black. But the synthesis I represented with purple on gray. I did this because the combination of black and white is gray, and the combination of blue with red is purple. So purple is often used by the Illuminati to represent synthesis, or the third pillar. So the reason I say all this is because a few months ago, in April, Prince died. And Prince was quite famous for his song Purple Rain. So you had purple light shows and all kinds of purple themes everywhere, supposedly in his honor. However, Prince at one point in his career seemed to allude to his being made up of two different genders, speaking about the Gemini and whatnot.
But during our conversation, the artist shared a very personal discovery he's recently made about himself. This is very interesting.
Recent analysis has proved that there's probably two people inside of me, just like a Gemini, and we haven't determined what sex that other person is yet.
What I'm getting from you is that you are very much in touch with both sides of yourself, your masculine and feminine side.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And always have been.
And he even admitted at one point that the symbol he used throughout his career was a combination of the symbols for male and female.
Yeah. So how did it come about? The symbol came to you, and the symbol is like a combination of female and male?
Yes.
And of course, he was well known for being rather feminine in both his dress and mannerisms. But what I'm saying is, Prince was a symbol to the elite of the synthesis of male and female, and his death, while tragic, it seems to be all too convenient for them and their schemes, since transgenderism is the in thing now. I mean, ask yourself, is this acceptance, and more than that, celebration of such a deplorable lifestyle as transgenderism even close to normal? Or does it seem forced, maybe guided by some kind of invisible hand? Like, I don't know, maybe the media, movies, celebrities, music, huge corporations, and on and on and on. And the culture has collapsed on so many similar issues that I believe are all a part of this hidden agenda. The whole LGBT movement, for instance, is clearly a psyop, which is short for psychological operation. But it's obviously been foisted on the public, and they've been preconditioned by all those sources that I mentioned, like media and movies, to accept it. But really, the goal of the elite with this particular psyop, LGBT, is to swap gender roles back and forth over and over until there's fluidity between the two in people's minds, so that there will no longer be any distinction between the two genders. And then the two categories will become obsolete, essentially synthesizing the two together. I mean, you can see this in the language that the LGBT movement itself uses. They have this term called gender fluid, which refers to a person who doesn't identify with any single fixed gender. So what's beginning to happen now is, because our society is beginning to see gender as a social construct, the gender binary, the dual male and female aspects, are no longer thought to be necessary. And so you have the synthesis of male and female occurring right before your eyes in the LGBT community itself. And I mean, besides the whole transgender aspect of it, this is also, of course, assisted by the bisexual and lesbian and gay sexual preferences, which also find their place in the acronym LGBT, because they also assist in the destruction of gender distinction, as one might guess would happen when a person believes a male and female aren't gender binaries meant only for one another. But also on this same topic, I'd like to take a second and point out just how absolutely devoted the elite are to this insane plot. They seriously believe this stuff because the makers behind those highly Gnostic Matrix movies that we already discussed, who were the Wachowski brothers, are now the Wachowski sisters. They both became transgender for the sake of this Gnostic Luciferian philosophy of theirs. Unbelievable. I mean, these two are seriously devoted to finishing the great work at any cost. But another obvious part of the agenda is the current race wars that are raging in the United States at the moment that, just like the LGBT movement, will result in a similar abandoning of reality, which what I mean is race will end up rejected altogether as just another social construct, which I've already seen this idea promulgated firsthand.
I am not black. I mean, that's what the world calls me, but it's not me. Along with whatever you call yourself, it's just a label. See, from birth, the world force feeds us these labels. Race was invented in the 15th century to divide people from each other, and it has worked perfectly. Who would you be if the world never gave you a label? Would you be white, black, Mexican, Asian, Native American, Middle Eastern, Indian? No. We would be one. We would be together. No longer living in the era of calling human beings black people or white people.
But don't get me wrong, I mean, there's technically only one race, human, but we all have actual differences that shouldn't be ignored. We have cultural, ancestral, physical, like skin color, and even linguistical differences that make us distinct from one another. And there's nothing wrong with that, because no matter what race or people group you are, take pride in that, and take pride in the fact that God made you distinct and different from others around you. That's a good thing. And it's not like I'm saying one race is better than another, nothing like that. They're all equal in God's eyes. God isn't a partial God. And it's just that there really are real distinctions between different people, and we shouldn't ignore that reality just because some people are belligerent racists, you know? But another psyop that I would point out is evolution. Evolution essentially teaches that men are just highly evolved animals, which in effect erases the boundaries between the two. And what better way to get society to accept the merger of human and animal, that is, chimeras, than to tell them they're already animals? And I mean, we already have examples where humans are mutilating themselves to appear more animal-like. I mean, it's similar to the transgender thing, it's just instead of becoming a different gender, they're becoming animals. And so the thing that I would ask about this is that how do you go about condemning bestiality and scientific endeavors to make human-animal crossbreeds when man is actually nothing but an animal in the first place? Do you see how they've rigged the system to collapse here? I mean, it seems that they intentionally pushed this view of evolution to begin with so that one day they can pull the rug out from under the people protesting such disgusting things as that. But notice that chimera crossbreeds between man and animal have been the fixation of the occult since the time of the Egyptians, and really it lives on today in the form of like werewolf movies and TV shows and vampire dramas and all that stuff. And I realize this psyop seems more unreasonable right now because it's so far out, but mark my words, man, you're gonna start seeing this stuff more and more. And just keep in mind that if you had told somebody in the 90s that gay marriage would be legal in such a short amount of time, they probably would have had the same reaction. But the evolution lie also helps the elite accomplish another key goal in synthesis, that is the synthesis of good and evil, or the blurring of the line between what's good and bad. Because if evolution is true and all we are is highly evolved pond scum, why not murder or lie or rape or a myriad of other things that past societies have deemed immoral? There's no real reason, besides fear of punishment by the government, so that the elite can keep people believing they're animals. They think they can make them act like it too. But it's the same kind of process we saw with the LGBT and the race issue. They're trying to blur the lines between good and evil by making good out out to be evil and evil out to be good. Then they change those standards so many times that it makes the two opposites fluid and easily interchangeable, essentially erasing any original distinction made between the two until society deems objective morality yet another social construct. But this stuff is exactly what ordo ab chao, or order out of chaos, means to these elite class secret societies. They bring about unity or synthesis through causing a state of chaos, as we've seen implemented with all these different psyops. But some of the more obvious psyops that are clearly being pushed towards by the elite is that of the one world order I spoke of before, which is sometimes referred to as the New World Order, where there's a one world government, a one world currency, a one world language, a one world leader, and even a one world religion. In other words, they want complete and utter unification of all things. It's always about taking the many and making them into a unified whole. But the last psyop I would point out is one that is meant to merge all the previous ones I've mentioned, and it's like the crowning jewel of the great work, falling just short in the pecking order of the synthesis of the demiurge. And I'm of course talking about transhumanism. And transhumanism can be seen as the merger of man and machine, of biology and technology, even life and death, though organic and inorganic is probably a more accurate way of putting it. The reason, though, that this is the one psyop to rule them all is because it ends the debate on the others. It's the capstone, in a sense. Because once it gets fully implemented and humans start becoming fully machine, there can no longer be any distinction between sexual orientation, gender, race, nationality, not even species will be a valid distinction any longer. And morals? Forget about it, they'll evaporate overnight. Not to mention the simultaneous abandoning of nearly all religion, because who needs to worry about an afterlife when you can't die? I mean, the only religious belief that won't be completely erased by transhumanism will be pantheistic monism, that teaches that all is one and that all is God. I mean, it's the very definition of the synthesis of macrocosm and microcosm, and really any and all opposites, because in pantheistic monism, all things in existence are seen as being one united whole. But this transhumanism agenda will be pushed on us by the appeal to all these other disunities that we've discussed, like race and gender and all these types of things. And people will eat it up because it will be promoted as the means to achieve world peace and to end hunger and to stop disease. I mean, heck, it'll even be promoted as the best social network out there. I mean, there's literally no end to the potential propaganda behind this one. But in the end, it's just a furthering of the religious doctrine about the synthesis. And so, essentially, this massive plot that I've drawn out here is what Nichols in 1968 has coined the one game, meaning this is the true and final agenda behind all their plotting, the real end goal they're striving after, and they'll stop at nothing to achieve. Everything else is just pawns they're moving to get to this final step, and all of it is done to achieve the great work, the eventual synthesis of all things, ending with the demiurge himself. Now, finally, I want to blow this thing out of the water, and I want to discuss some key flaws found in this religious doctrine and its varying beliefs. I mean, other than the fact that it's just plainly absurd. So, first, I'd point out something that basically immediately invalidated this whole thing for me, and that's flawed logic when it comes to selecting opposites that supposedly need to be synthesized. Many of them aren't even opposites at all when you think about it. So let me show you what I mean by looking at a few. And so first, darkness and light, which is also to speak of night and day. Problem is that the darkness of night, or any kind of darkness really, is actually what's called a privation. It's a privation of light, meaning it's not a thing in and of itself, it's a lack of light. Darkness is not a physical entity like light is. Light consists of particles. Darkness has no components though. It can't be examined scientifically in any way because it's a privation. So to say the two need to be synthesized is an utter misunderstanding of the nature of darkness. You can't synthesize light and nothing nothing, you would still just have light by itself, completely unmixed. And this can be pictured well with the yin-yang symbol. You have the light and the dark side. Well, if that symbol was based in reality, all you'd have is the light half hanging in midair, and you wouldn't be able to differentiate between the background and the dark half, because again, darkness is merely a lack of light, not a solid color in and of itself. So technically the dark side would just be see-through and non-existent, really. And this is the problem with many of these supposed opposites. For example, life and death, like we saw in the Ouroboros. The Ouroboros represents how life is sustained through death, while in point of fact, life is only sustained by life. You don't get life from non-life. And this just shows how elementary these doctrines are. I mean, it's just like that Bible verse, claiming to be wise, they became fools. I mean, these supposed like Freemasonic and Gnostic geniuses throughout the years, this is all they could come up with? Just these flawed, error-filled ideas like these? I mean, it's clear they haven't really thought this through in a real way, because what's actually happening in the process of this supposed circle of life is that an animal eats another animal, which when it eats the animal, that animal's body is still living in a sense, and has millions and millions of living components in it still. So when it eats it, its own body consumes the energy from those living biological components, which then produces energy for its own cells. So actually, life is being sustained by life, not death. And again, death is also a privation. It's a privation of life. It's not an opposite state of being from life. It's the absence of life.
But I feel very strongly that we are who we choose to be.
First of all, that's not mumbo jumbo. It makes sense, number one. Number two, I think sales of The Alchemist just went up.
Well,
whatever that book is, the sales just went up on Amazon.com right about now. When that happens, I'm going to call you and say, Will, I went live. It really went up.
No, it's great.
No,
it's a quick read, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you can spell alchemist. That's a good Scrabble word, alchemist.
No, but the alchemist, right, because it's great. Like, what I consider myself an alchemist. An alchemist is basically a mystical chemist, right? And one of the great feats that alchemists used to do is they would take lead, just take a chunk of lead, and they could turn lead into gold, right? So the symbolism.
Sounds like a good hustle.
I know, right?
When I leave here, give me some lead.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, but I'm so connected to symbolically being able to turn lead into gold. You know, my grandmother used to say, you know, life give you a lemon, you go ahead and make lemonade.
Absolutely.
To me, that's alchemy. That's the same concept behind the alchemist.
A future that Ernest Cline, the writer of the book, envisioned. I was very careful with Ernie collaborating with me every step of the way to be able to find the movie narrative inside this dense forest of Ernie's profound imagination.
The Oasis being the ultimate toy box with all the toys in the world, and then playing that with one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. It results in just amazing action and such a fun adventure.
Ernest Cline is such a visionary, and I think has seen the future before any of us possibly could even imagine it.